Professor Sarita Ramsaroop is the Head of Department Childhood Education Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg and joins us now for more. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the invite.
So in the intro to that story, I said that getting through matric is about 1 year of hard work, but that's not really true, is it? It's quite a long journey, and the foundation is probably the most important part.
That's absolutely correct. We all place so much of emphasis on the grade 12 exams, but the foundations actually start in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 in the foundation, the early years. And that is where you start laying the foundations for mathematics learning, as well as learning of languages. And if that is not done well, you find that the children are going to struggle throughout life. If you have to look at the quality of the passes, many of our students will not enter university, because they would not necessarily make the minimum requirements in mathematics. And that, of course, stems from the early years of education in the primary school that I think has been neglected over the years. We do, if we look at the technical briefing made by the Director General of Basic Education, there was a decline in the mathematics results to 55%. What this means is that, it's not sustainable as a country when we focus too much on the exit class, but at the expense of the lower grades. If we have to look at Finland, for example, there's an equal focus holistically on all age groups. We're getting to university throughout, and we're going to struggle to be sustainable as a country in the economic frame. And again, I go back to mathematics and the languages that are inadequate in the primary schools. Deep conceptual understanding of mathematics must be built in the early years. And I think this is where we are struggling, because fewer learners are actually not just passing, but fewer learners are also taking mathematics, pure mathematics in grade 10. In fact, many schools are actually encouraging learners to take maths literacy. And, with this smaller pool, it's quite problematic as a country going forward. I think the approach must be two-pronged. One is in terms of an investment in our children in the early years, focusing on how they learn and develop in both these key areas. And the second would be on teacher development. In the higher education space, good foundation and intermediate-based programs are key. And it needs to lay the foundations for higher learning. Without that, you will find that the entire education system for the child is going to collapse. In a way, unfortunately, what we've done is we've also closed doors on many career paths for our students, because the number of careers that we actually need is very dependent on mathematics. We're working very, very closely at UJ with the Department of Higher Education in terms of strengthening our intermediate and foundation-based programs. We know when our first years enter universities, they enter with a very they struggle with mathematics. And although our APS scores are 26, we ensure that our intake is minimum requirements of mathematics is of 40% and maths literacy is 60. They still struggle in the first years. And of course, this actually has huge knock-on effects in terms of how to catch up.
All right, we'll talk about the teachers just now. I am curious about the checks and balances along the way. I get a sense sometimes that there are only maybe 2 or 3 genuine checkpoints, end of grade 7 perhaps, end of grade 10, where there really is a proper assessment about what happens next. Is there nothing happening before and after those points?
Well, in terms of that would be at a department level in terms of those checks and balances, but in the school, of course, on a yearly basis. Remember that you have continuous assessment testing that is taking place throughout the year. Teachers are picking up in areas, the gaps that children in terms of their learning, finding ways to address this. The problem is that the teachers lack conceptual understanding of how to address these gaps. And learners are then being pushed through to higher grades without actually having a strong foundation of key concepts that will actually help them in learning in the higher grades. So while we do have those checks and balances, much of it lies in the hands of teachers. And I think that is where we actually need to actually invest greatly in terms of, with regards to our country.
How do the children catch up? Because the problem might be detected in grade 8, that there was something that you should have learned in grade 5 or grade 4 even, and it just wasn't there. How do we catch them up?
That is a difficult conundrum that we have to address. It is incredibly difficult. If you have to look at the years, the 2 years of the COVID that we've lost, in real terms, to catch up the learnings that have been lost will take years for those. Those children are going to continue to struggle. And it would mean, we can't say spend more time in the classroom. That's not going to be possible. Longer periods learning, but it does mean that we need to focus on key areas of development in children. I think it's very, very important that if we understand how children learn and develop, how their brain functions, we can actually zone in and make learning a lot more easier. I wouldn't call it easier, but also in terms of getting them to grasp concepts with long-term comprehension and understanding rather than superficial learning. And I think right now what we're doing is we're focusing on superficial learning, and the long-term deep understanding is getting lost. And that is where we are picking this up at university when they come to us. And you find that much of what they studied in high school is just not, it's not working for them, and leading to very high failure rates as well as dropouts.
I have to believe that there's an equal distribution of IQ throughout the world. And it never ceases to amaze me where you see children in China or India or other countries who excel at a very young age. Is it then the problem of the system and the quality of teaching that's holding our children back?
Absolutely. There's much of our research that does point to that. Quality of teachers, teachers lacking the understanding of how to teach reading for understanding, for example, focusing too much on procedural knowledge in mathematics rather than in terms of your conceptual understanding. And then, of course, as well, maybe we need to look at the curriculum again. Are we doing too much? Are we expecting too much from a very early age? Is it scaffolded correctly for our children to be able to grasp the concepts? Or are we taking huge leaps and bounds and expecting them to catch up? And I think that it requires further interrogation from department level, and I know that is taking place at the moment. But of course, I know that the Department of Higher Education, together with the DBE, there's a lot of investment going in. There is recognition that if you have to look at our PILS tests and how our students are performing, as well as in the TIMS tests, we're still not doing well. And of course, the quick fix is in terms of having very short training programs for teachers. These are not working. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be long-term. And I think we need to revisit exactly what is happening in the classroom, where the gaps are, and how we can address this from a teacher's perspective as well.
Prof, thank you very, very much indeed. Your insights greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good
All
night.
right. Good night. That's Professor Sarita Ramsaroop, who's the head of Department of Childhood Education at the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg, talking to us about the challenges of the system and the quality of teaching. And we should be pushing our children a lot more to do those big subjects.